All right, we'll go ahead and start this meeting, and as others join, that'll be great. Looks like we got a good little group today, so we can have a good, healthy discussion amongst us. As has been our tradition here, and this has been a forum where we can all share ideas and brainstorm with each other, and that's been the purpose and idea behind this. As we go forward, I'm just going to throw out a question. Maybe you have an answer right now, maybe you don't, but really my purpose is just to get us thinking about this. And in terms of, as we go forward with this group, and as we finish up this year, what will be most useful to us going forward? What do we want this to become? What do we need it to become? What do you need it to be for you and your institution and would be most useful? Some of my initial thoughts are that when we're through this year, one of the things that I would like to do is beef up the resource library and that we've started to create on the network. And so we have some resources, we have these meetings recorded, and they're put there. There's a few documents sitting there, but I would really like to focus in on how do we make that network useful in terms of resources. Culture is a really interesting thing and it involves so many different professions and different disciplines. And it would be nice to have that cross-pollination. There's a lot of other groups as well that touch on culture, doing things with AZA as well. And so trying to figure out how maybe we cross-collaborate with each other. But back to my original question as I started the conversation, what would be useful for this group as we contemplate going forward into the future? We've got a while to think about that. We still have a few more months that we'll do these kind of town hall meetings where we share with each other and we talk about the specific question that we'll put up a little bit later here. And we have these facilitated conversations. And I think those are good because those are getting us to begin to think about the issues that we have to deal with when we talk about culture. And there's a lot of different issues. And hence why it's so good to have such a wide variety also of people involved in this conversation. But what do we want it to be ultimately? So I just throw that up to begin this group to begin thinking about that and asking ourselves that question. And if there's any immediate thoughts, sure, right now, I'm happy to have anybody chime in on that. But more, like I said, I don't expect everybody to just have the answer right now, unless all of a sudden you had this big epiphany as I was speaking. And you just have to share it. So. It doesn't look like anybody had an epiphany, so okay, we'll move on. So the first thing that I would like to bring up is that I'm going to call it a recap of the live meeting we had at Annual in Baltimore, but it's not really so much of a recap. All that information will be getting shared out to everybody who was involved, or at least who we have their involved here, I should say, because I have your emails and I have your contact information. I'm happy to share it beyond this group if I receive contact and email information. Just so you know what we did, and I'm going to share my screen here so we can talk about, yeah. So you now should be able to see my screen. And the topic or the title of that session at AZA, we had it on, it was Tuesday late afternoon, this session, August 30th. Yeah, there it is. I should read my own screen. Tuesday, August 30th. Does your zoo or aquarium have a culture of conservation? It was great because there was a number of you who have been on these calls who were here, but there was also more. The room was pretty full with people who were just interested in this topic and had come into the room. What we did that day was we threw out these 4 questions, and you probably recognize these 4 questions of questions that we've addressed here together in the past as we've been moving through this process here. And we put those questions up in 4 different stations around the room. Interestingly, our event was live streamed, and so we had to make some adjustments and kind of help some people who were actually also tuning in to watch the session. Our format wasn't very conducive to that, but we kind of made it work, and I hope it was helpful to them. But we sent people to 4 different corners with paper and pens and facilitated discussions on these 4 different questions. And so we got a lot of information. So in addition to us in this meeting that we're having right now, when we address these questions, we have that information captured. We will have all the information captured and eventually disseminated out to everybody regarding these 4 questions that we addressed in that room that day. So it was really productive. A lot of information came out, and I think it was a lot of helpful. Anybody who was there, I would just love to hear from you, your thoughts and impressions of how that session went that day. I'm gonna stop sharing there. Was any of you there at that live session? Okay. Oh, yeah, Stacia, I see you there. Maybe you could just give a little summary of how you felt the session went and the benefits that came out of that.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I actually really liked it because I didn't participate when we broke out into the groups because I was kind of monitoring, but I really enjoyed that because what I can say is I heard a lot of great conversations happening. We had to stop people to move on to the next question or to, so that was really, I feel like there's a lot of excitement and buzz around this. And from what I gathered from going to, and Jeremy can probably really get into this because he was leading one of the groups, but it sounds like a lot of organizations are looking into this right now and having conversations about this at all different levels. So I think being part of this group is very beneficial. Something that people can take back to their organizations or invite more people from their organizations to get on the calls, or as we move forwards, utilize the resources. So that's more of a general kind of overview take, but I mean, there's this group of us that's on the calls quite often, but I saw a lot of new faces, and it sounded like, everybody was really excited and interested to talk more and more about this.
Yeah, very good. Jeremy, and Kareem, I think I saw you there as well. Yeah, so why don't you both just chime in a little bit?
I could jump in right now. Thank you, Stacia. Yeah, I mean, I also agree with everything Stacia said. I think I think we're at a really cool turning point where everyone is talking about this and to where how are we going to get to that point? I think everyone looking for that magic answer, and the magic answer doesn't exist currently, but how you alluded to, Jeff, what resources and what things can we do to really start keeping, taking these ideas and bring them into action. I think that's where everyone's at right now. So I think that was a really cool thing to kind of hear. I led one section on how to build the desired conservation culture internally, and it was so unique to have different perspectives because there's people who never even really dabbled into this and said aha moments, and other ones that, for example, like Houston has a huge conservation culture, and kind of hearing what they've done. So I think a lot of this was, great information gathering and a really great opportunity to take back some great ideas for their institutions from there. And I know that's the general thought of AZA in general, but you can see it kind of firsthand, at least in my little section that I was leading from there.
All right, thank you.
So Jeff, I attended the second session, not the first one, but overall, same as what other people have said, a lot of interest, and I think also appreciation that there's a group working on it specifically, and a group that might provide some resources that people can use, borrow.
Yeah, fantastic. So again, I want us to be thinking about where we're going to go with this. And so we don't, like I said, we don't have an answer to that today. And a quote comes to mind. You've probably heard it: "Strategy eats culture for lunch, for breakfast." Strategy Eats Culture for Breakfast. It's attributed to Peter Drucker. By the way, he didn't write it or say it. I researched it thoroughly, and I was like, one of those internet things that say, yeah, if you look it up and type it in, it'll be like Peter Drucker said it. And anyway, actually, a lot of other people said it or expressed ideas to that sentiment, but it's actually very true. And if you look at AZA and what AZA is trying to do, how many of you, just out of curiosity, there was the general session when Dr. Terrell from Disney introduced the AZA framework that they've rolled out, and then that's been sent into an email, and you can read the whole plan. I went to a session afterwards that drilled down into it. How many of you are familiar with what I'm talking about, that AZA framework? Okay, Laura, I see you raising your hand, and a few others. Interesting, if you look at that, it doesn't say specifically, work on culture, although it's in there. But it says the things that need to be accomplished are the things that we're talking about here in terms of how do we move our organizations forward and create that environment or that culture that's going to not only support but drive those efforts. Another thing for perspective on this is that the SAFE program, Saving Animals from Extinction program, is currently being reworked and rewritten. Not an overhaul, but a tuning of it, a fine tuning of it, so that it can be a program that member organizations can plug into and use. And a huge aspect of that, and I've been fortunate to be involved in part of that process, is that there's a philosophy surrounding this SAFE program, what they're calling PAC. And whether that makes it into the vernacular or you hear that word or not, what it means. So SAFE PAC, P-A-C-T, people advancing conservation together. So the recognition from at the AZA level and with the SAFE program, specifically what I'm referring to right now, SAFE PAC, so saving animals from extinction, people advancing conservation together. We're talking about, again, culture. We're talking about culture issues, and culture is what drives and supports all of these efforts. So some things for us and you to think about in terms of your institutions and in relation to AZA as well, as an AZA institution, and how will we in our collective organizations begin to implement these things, and what will that look like? It's from I'll tell you, since I'm in the human resources field, that's where my lens comes from, perspective, and we've got our fingers everywhere. But it's very much, all of these ultimately come down to the people in our organization, because nothing happens, whether it's conservation or conservation efforts or a mission, unless you're talking about the people who are behind there making it happen. So it's important work. I'm going to share my screen one more time. Not actually one more time, right now, once again. And share screen. There we go. Just to let you know, remind us where we're at. So today, September, we'll be addressing this question: what are the obstacles and solutions to culture challenges? When I think about that, I think of a lot. This can be really hard work, rewarding but hard work. In October, we're going to be talking about DEI in relation to culture building. You can probably add justice in there. You can probably add access. You can add belonging. All of those issues. November. What are the communications issues regarding culture building? And then finally, December, this is where we'll really, I hope, start to have a good discussion on the questions I asked earlier today. Where are we going, basically? Where do we want it to go, and what do we need things to be? So I just wanted to share that and remind you with you. So with those are my preliminary statements today. And I'm going to, in just a minute, turn it over to Jeremy, who's going to facilitate today's discussion. As I told him, I just don't have him do it because I want him to do it. He actually does really a great job. Jeremy is a really good facilitator. So let me see if I can advance my screen one more time. Here's today's discussion question. And I will leave that up for just a few minutes, but then I'll turn the time over now to Jeremy to go ahead and take it away for today's discussion.
All righty, thank you, Jeff. Your paycheck's in the mail for that one. You're setting a high standard there. Now I'm a little more nervous with that one. But thank you all here. So all this is gonna be led to kind of your conversations. I'm here to kind of keep it going from there. And this is where we're here together is to try to build, what happens next for us. So what are the obstacles and solutions to your institution's culture challenges? We talked about some of these things in, small doses along the way in the last couple, months, but, has anything new come up? Has anything, any aha moments have you had from these webinars or at AZA this year? I know we had a few of those in my session. So if anyone has something that really just pops out, I would think let's break the ice a little bit. Let's hear it. Alrighty. You can either chime in by unmuting or you can raise your hand and I can kind of call upon you.
Hi.
Valerie, hi. All right.
Oh, hi, everybody. Yeah, so I think if you're asking about what the challenges are, it's very clear. I think the old and the new, so people who have been in the organization for 25 years and the people who have just come into the organization and the different mindsets and the different, modern versus non-modern, understanding AZA, not understanding AZA. It's the whole, how do these two groups come together? And what does culture even mean? Like, that's a big one. So we all struggle with that. And we are actually here at our zoo, we are taking those conservation questions, some of those we've incorporated into our major employment engagement survey. So we can get an understanding of that culture piece, conservation culture, and all about a bunch of other questions. So we're really looking forward to what that's going to produce in the next 3 weeks. And then on top of that, we are actually having a 12-week culture evolution rollout. And we've hired somebody to come and help us do that. So that's kind of how we're digging into what this looks like for us. I think the employment engagement survey with the culture evolution, sorry, I don't have the right, I'm hacking up the title right now. It sounds much more eloquent than I'm explaining. So we have somebody helping us over the next 12 weeks, and we're going to have this really culture evolution change. You don't change it in 12 weeks, but we need to start somewhere. So that's how we're trying to tackle it right now, and adding the layer of the conservation culture change as well, because that's new to me because I come from the academic world. So that whole conservation piece, I think is obviously needed, but a really great add-on to what we're doing already, what we're trying to do. So that's kind of the challenges we're facing, and that's how we're trying to start to dig away at the problem. And I'd be happy to share the journey of our 12 weeks and how that goes. And, I could share the roadmap that we have for the next 12 weeks. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I think all of us are like, yes, please share that resource. I think all of us need to start somewhere. And I think that's a perfect one to have in there. So yes, we could share that either in the group chat during this time here, or send a message to myself or Jeff. We can make sure we upload that to our resource library on the network for sure. And Valerie, you said, having the obstacle of having, new employees. I think even you said you're fairly new to the Toronto Zoo, right? And seeing the difference of people who've been there for 25 years, what have you seen in terms of those obstacles in place from there? Like, how have you started breaking down some of those barriers a little bit for that obstacle in place?
You're asking me how to,
because you come in and
yeah. I mean, I think it's the same in every organization. Honestly, it's very, very similar. It's how to get the, the ones over the fence to kind of have that change mind perspective people are just stuck. And what I hear a lot is, oh, we just want to go back to the old way. The old way was better. It was harder, you know, but it was just better. I'm more comfortable there, but we can't have the old way. So, and this is just a common theme everywhere I've been. It's just, how do we get, you know, we've been going through a lot here at our Toronto Zoo, with a lot of very contentious issues. I don't know if everybody knows about it, but so it's been really tough. And the people who have been here is, why can't you just leave things the way they are? You're ruining everything for everybody, which is not true. And we can only share so much information. So it's, how do we get that? You're never going to get everybody over, but how do we get some movement in those, so we kind of are all singing on the same sheet? It's, again, this is like a world problem. I think it's not just a
Certainly,
problem,
yes.
right? Like, yeah.
Interesting. I was kind of curious. Okay, great. And I think, are you using your then engagement survey to help kind of push what you need to focus on then from there? And then is that going to be shared with the roadmap of your consultant coming in for the culture piece? Is that going to kind of go hand in hand?
Yeah, that'll all tie in, and we have a whole nother piece around that ties into that, and we've been working with that. We've been working on empowered decision making at the manager and director level. That ties into our employment engagement survey. That will tie into now this whole culture change piece, which we're rolling out. So it's kind of a bunch of pieces coming together, and let's see what that looks like, you know, through this journey. Hopefully we'll have something in January, and that also ties into our diversity survey, which we did. So there's a bunch of pieces right now. I like everything in a box tied and, you know, here you go, this is what you need to do, but I don't think that's going to happen.
So, well, thank you very much for sharing that. I think all of us are very interested. So please, you know, any resources or any, you know, aha moments along the way, I think would all benefit from that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Valerie, please share that. You've got my email, right? Or Jeremy's? Okay, I want to make sure. Yeah, we would love to receive that for sure, and then we'll get it out to the group.
Yes, and all right, Doug, you had your hand up first, then.
Okay, as I unmute myself, I wanted to come alongside Valerie because some similar experiences, especially in the old zoo versus new zoo, and the perception of what that is by the people who either categorize themselves in those two areas or are categorized by the opposite area as being in that area, because those two things are very different here. Our biggest issue, and I think all of you know, because in prior sessions, we've talked about our conservation strategic planning. We've brought IUCN in to help us with this. This conservation culture is a part of it. We are now on track to have that finished by December 31st at 11:59 p.m. And would be very happy to share all of that once we're done. But we broke it down into a discovery phase, which really did a deep dive, like Valerie's describing, into our staff and where their feelings are. Specifically surrounding conservation. And it was interesting because we're dealing with this old zoo staff versus new zoo staff, which for us is not even, I think, as deep as Toronto's, because Akron Zoo 20 years ago, we had 37 staff members. You know, today we're around 200, and we've had an 1,800% growth over that 20-year period. So the people who are being talked about here as old zoo aren't that old. And the people who are being talked about as new zoo are actually very accomplished professionals who came in either from another facility or from other facilities in our neighborhood, so to speak, to help us as we grew. So it's a really challenging thing to look at because old zoo generally lived and breathed conservation because everybody wore a conservation hat. New zoo, it's trying to create the culture so that even people who come in from the outside, from accounting or marketing or wherever else, that they understand what a conservation hat is. And so it truly is distinct, different, and can't be quote unquote attacked in the same way when we look at providing training and onboarding, or when we look at providing that continuous professional development over time. So we will have more to add to it. But for us, the fact that we grew by 1,800% in 20 years has given us really unusual barriers to figure this out, that I think maybe a lot of other places haven't had to face, or at least our definitions are probably different than other organizations' definitions because of the tension and the stress building that happened along with that growth. The other thing I would say, I know I mentioned this a couple of meetings ago, the fact that we have multiple factions across the Association of Zoos and Aquariums talking about a culture of blank. One thing that this conference did for me is to demonstrate that maybe either conservation culture needs to knit all of those other things in so that we're part of a greater tapestry, or perhaps this even all elevates to what is an AZA culture. What does the Association of Zoos and Aquariums culturally represent? Because all of the culture of blanks that go on, you know, philanthropy, culture of conservation, culture of DEAI, it just keeps on going. Animal welfare, now animal well-being, all of these things are critically important to who we are and how they integrate together when we're done, in order for us to accurately tell our story to the public, who is struggling with other questions of, you know, what is the definition of zoo and why should animals be in our care in the first place? So that's all I would add.
That's all, Doug? That was very light. Well, thank you. I think those are all very powerful questions that I think all of us will have to continue to talk about, because I think you're hit the nail on the head with what does the AZA culture look like, because that kind of does trickle to many areas. So thank you for sharing. I think all of us are also be looking for that resource on December 31st at 11:59 as well. So thank you for giving us a nice countdown. So appreciate that. So Gill, you had your hand up next from Georgia.
Yeah, my question is actually for Valerie. You said you guys were putting questions or had put questions into your engagement survey regarding the conservation culture. And I'm curious, did you come up with those questions on your own? Did you get them from somewhere? Did your survey company help you come up with those?
No, we got them from the survey that was sent from, I think, Jeff, you sent it.
Oh, okay.
Jeff, was it you?
So-
There was a lot of questions, so I just asked the staff to take some key questions that they thought would be helpful and incorporate them into our employment engagement survey. I think it came from you, Jeff.
It did, and really it came from AZA. So
Okay.
that survey, for all the original zoos or aquariums involved in this group who signed up originally, AZA was able to create a customized survey that was made available to all of those different institutions. So I know Georgia came on later, and so you weren't included in that customization link that was available. But it ultimately came from AZA, ultimately from a study that started this whole effort we're doing here about 3 years ago, when the executive leadership group was originally tasked with answering the question of how does member organizations create a culture of conservation within AZA and within their institutions. And they worked with Antioch University to create a peer-reviewed, not peer-reviewed, but what's, I'm sorry, those who are in the academic world, when you review your survey before it goes out to the world. Anyway, it was academically reviewed, and an Antioch University was the one who administered that to, I think it was about 20 organizations within AZA originally. And out of that, it was over 1,000, almost 2,000 responses. And they took that and they did all the number crunching and all the analytics on that survey. That survey then was modified as we moved forward, now moved forward a couple of years to us. And AZA took that, modified it a bit, and made it available to those members here who had originally signed up for the pilot program originally. Long history, there's where that survey came from. But I can make available the questions. I have in a PDF form all the questions that are on that survey. And so if you would like, please reach out to me and just tap me and I'll send that to you. And then you can see those questions and you can create, because at this point, the survey has been given to whoever has that link, it's theirs. We're not involved with it. AZA isn't involved with it. It's simply a tool that you can use as you see fit in whatever way you see fit to use it. So yeah, I'd be happy to send those questions to you. Just send me an email so I remember to do that.
Perfect. We're getting ready to launch our employee engagement survey. So just wondering where those questions came from. So I would love that. We'll send somebody from our team will send you an email.
Great, awesome, thank you. Jim?
Yeah, a couple of things, they're spurred by something that Doug has shared. Like when we talk about culture, right, we're talking about like the values, practices, and norms in an organization. And every institution has a culture of conservation. So it's not like we're trying to build a culture of conservation. It's like, what kind of culture of conservation do we want to have at our zoo or aquarium? And we also can't ignore that we're all individually situated in communities that have an incredibly strong influence on the culture that exists within our own institution. So while like Valerie is saying, you're never going to get a box that says, here's your culture that you're going to build as your organization. You really have to get in there and understand. Our box is going to have tools in it for you to understand your own culture and then decide as a community how you want to build that culture. And so it's, I think the pieces of that puzzle, when you think of norms and practices and shared values, they have to include the DEI stuff, and they have to include animal welfare because it's part of the One Health paradigm, right? So these things, at one point it sounds like you're trying to create a theory of everything, but you're not. You're just trying to build a culture of conservation that meaningfully includes these things that we know have to be part of it. And DEI, like if I tried to bring a concept of a culture of conservation without a strongly integrated DEI, lens to my institution, I would be roasted. It would never get past the first review. So I think it's not, I don't think we should view it as too daunting a task, but I also don't think that we can proceed without including those things at all.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sorry, I completely agree. Every culture, for me, it's EDI. The equity, diversity, inclusion is, we can't do anything without moving that forward. It's just not going to work. And for us at the zoo, we know that, so we were extremely happy that we just hired our first director of Indigenous relations. That's a whole culture piece. Like, that's huge for us because that speaks to our community, and we need to make some changes within that community. And I think that's a piece of the culture change. If that makes sense.
That's awesome, Valerie. I appreciate you saying that. I guess it was a community asking for that, or is that something that part of your plan? I'm just kind of curious to see, because I know everyone's community is very different and it has a place into how it, goes from there. I'm just kind of curious if it's flipped around. If are you trying to create that community for Indigenous people, or I'm just kind of curious to see where that moment came for you.
It's both ways.
Yeah.
So we have a huge community. We have partnerships with, we're building partnership with Indigenous communities, but also we've written it into our new mission statement in the next 3 years, having indigeneity as part of, Dolph's not going to, our CEO is not going to like that. I don't know the line off by heart, but there's a piece that I haven't memorized it yet, but there's an indigeneity piece in our strategic vision. So that and then we have the whole Indigenous community saying we don't feel like we're part of the zoo. And it's true. It's really true. So we've really created partnerships with the Indigenous communities. We've written in, they want to be part of us and we want them to be part of us. So it's all it was a two-way street, if you want to call it that, for lack of a better word.
Sure, that's great. I know Liz from Hogle Zoo said she's kind of interested to see, how your this new position influences conservation work you might have there.
Absolutely, that will be huge.
Interesting, very cool. I appreciate you sharing that. Like a lot of aha moments for sure on those pieces. Does anyone else have any other topics or examples you want to share? I mean, again, thank you very much, Valerie and Doug so far, and Jim for those perspectives to have. It's not only just a one size fits all type of thing. It has to really include a lot of things and has to fit from what the direction of the organization and how it relates to the community as well. So anyone, I'm looking at you, Laura, a little bit too, right here. I know you are fairly new to your position in the conservation piece in there, and I'm kind of curious, how that lens on your end.
Sure, thank you. So, hi, I'm Laura. This is my first time in one of these. I joined after AZA. I'm the conservation coordinator at the Little Rock Zoo, and I started about 6 months ago. And what I found here is, I totally agree with when you said we don't need to build a culture of conservation. We have that. There is a culture of conservation here. I think the challenge we're going to have moving forward is how we want to sort of shift our conservation focus a little bit. And there's likely to be some pretty sort of strong feelings about change. So it's old versus new, but it's not like old school versus new school so much as the last few years versus maybe what we want to see moving forward, and aligning the program a little better with sort of the zoo philosophy and goals for conservation, which we sort of need to outline first before we can even start to make those changes. But I think that's the challenge I think that I'm going to face, or that those of us trying to make these changes are going to face, is that maybe some beloved programs may not fit those goals in the same way. And maybe I'm hoping that, having conversations with staff and I'm interested in those questions because we want to do a survey and sort of get a feeling from staff what they're looking for. That we'll be able to start big and start with sort of goals and philosophies, and that as we then get focused on what specifically we want to do, it'll help make people, will be a little, be easier for people to sort of accept some changes. I also think we want to really focus on the local piece, because I think for so many people here, for local Central Arkansans, we can make it more tangible for our community if we can talk about, don't kill snakes you see in your backyard. Why? Or turtles you're likely to see when you're out for a walk. That we can maybe make these pieces a little more tangible before we try to also have the bigger international piece, I guess.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing that. Looking forward to seeing that growth on your end as well. So
thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah. In the chat. So Sarah, you mentioned that you have a nice little piece there. Are you able to maybe elaborate more on how you engage your conservation engagement team a little bit? I think that's an interesting response to what your team members thought of conservation culture.
Sure. So Jim and I at the Seattle Aquarium are really interested in this, and the Seattle Aquarium participated in the data collection with Jackie Ogden and the survey a few years back, and since then there's been I think there's just been a lot of large kind of systemic movement and change within the aquarium culturally as an organization, and two huge pieces of that are our equity strategic plan that now exists and has been updated, and new positions and new leadership that are helping to advance that, as well as an organization-wide regenerative plan. And I think that any work that we do around investigating and unpacking this idea of a conservation culture has to be, really integrated with these other dimensions of our organizational mission and culture. And I was curious just what kind of came to mind. I think we've really had a movement as an organization to try to do a lot to really change our approach in terms of participatory engagement and equity and co-creation with our amazing team. And, I've shared with this group before that I believe really strongly that the most passionate champions of conservation are already our staff, and that the more we can increase their sense of belonging and agency and self-efficacy is how we connect their passion to, I guess our maybe more organizational definition of conservation. Anyway, so we had some spare time in a department meeting a few weeks ago. And so I just broke people into some conversation groups and asked them to try to kind of unpack like what that construct might mean, this idea of building or enhancing a conservation culture. And unsurprisingly, and I think Jim mentioned this in his comment, the Seattle Aquarium has, we have a lot of really passionate critical thinkers on staff, as I'm sure all of our organizations do. And their first reactions were really thoughtful, and they were tuned into some of the, I don't want to say like problematic aspects, but some dimensions of conservation that may not be immediately apparent to all of us as we're thinking about it in a really positive sense. So they pointed out, they were really dialed in and sensitive to the nuances of classism and ableism, colonialism that have imbued and shaped some conventional understandings of what conservation is. And so I think it just reinforced for us that we can't jump into this work in a prescriptive top-down way. It truly has to be participatory and co-created with our teams. Otherwise, we run the risk of not just like imposing some kind of program, from the top down on folks. We could severely harm people and damage their relationship to the organization if we don't consider those dimensions, those more problematic and complex dimensions of historic kind of and traditional definitions of conservation.
That's great and very truthful from there. Now, what I'm gathering too is I feel like there's a lot of different things to consider. It's not just, like you said, one size fits all, and it's interesting to see the different perspectives from the different representations. From the conservation and education standpoint, from the HR standpoint. So it's a bigger piece of the apple to kind of bite off from there, but it's very important because I think it's going to help us, make that growth and important, and going back to Doug's comment, like looking at what does the culture of AZA and how this falls into it. I think we have some bigger things to bite off, but it's really interesting to hear these perspectives, and thank you all for sharing so far on that one. I know, Doug, you had your hand up for a hot second there for a minute. I'm not sure if you still want to comment on anything.
I did put my comment in the chat because
sorry, I missed it. Sorry.
That's okay. It probably just popped up. I have a little bit of a delay at my end for whatever reason. Really, in summary, I was one of the people on the original task force that launched all of this, and there was recognition that every AZA facility had what they called a conservation culture, but every facility was different than every other facility. And if we truly are North America's biggest conservation movement, it's good to embrace the diversity of difference of approach, but there needed to be a common understanding around the definition of conservation, because it was felt that most facilities focused on field conservation, in essence, waiting for species to be ready to drop off the face of the earth before we did anything about them. And it was much more important for us to be able to begin working on human behavior change through our guests, so that we could actually make a difference in the long term as opposed to the short term. And this was really the value of sustainability and green practices, getting at the root cause of species endangerment, so that we're working on the full spectrum of conservation, not compartmentalizing it in just one area. And the biggest thing that came out of that original survey and all the work that ELDP cohort did was there was broad naivete around the idea of getting at root cause. And that was a huge challenge. And so a lot of this effort to really move conservation culture forward, it was around, every organization does have some element of it clearly baked in, but what are you doing to coordinate your definition through efforts like this? That's why we're having these conversations, because that broad spectrum is where we can collectively make the biggest difference. So that's all I wanted to offer.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. It's really powerful.
Well, I'd like just one quick, Doug, would you explain a little bit more? Because I really understand this. I think you've hit something very key. So there's a lot of naivety around what were the root causes, and maybe expand a little bit what you were saying, what you were looking at and seeing at that time, by what you mean by those root causes.
Okay, there are particular programs right now, like the Palm Oil Act or Seafood Watch, that really do nail and get at the root causes of species endangerment for those species that are affected by overharvesting of seafood or by not failing to purchase sustainable palm oil. Those are examples of what get at the root causes of species endangerment. And we as humans have some control because we were the cause of the endangerment in the first place. So if we change our behavior, we can actually get at that root cause and improve the circumstance. But broadly, instead of having every AZA facility focus on root cause, we found that close to 90% were focused on essentially emergency room triage of species when it's probably too late because they no longer perform the ecological functions in a system that they exist in because there's far too little animals left. And so the question became, does everybody really understand? While yes, it's very important to work on saving endangered species, nobody's arguing that. But is that where all of our eggs, is that the basket that all of our eggs should be in? Or might we want to be more proactive and think about, for example, what we're going to do about plastics in the ocean? How do we intercede to prevent plastics from ever getting in the ocean in the first place? I mean, there are some broad scale efforts that truly get at the root cause of endangerment that most AZA facilities were not even considering. Most. And that was the essence of the conversation around how do we build a conservation culture so it isn't left to this field conservation piece, in essence, try to save their life through active propagation rescue, and maybe you'll succeed and maybe you won't. If we could just intervene much earlier by actually having at least some of our attention focused on root cause, we could probably do much more for much less effort and many fewer dollars. Even though you hear politically, it's going to cost so much money to get at root cause of plastic pollution or air pollution or what have you, that's the place where we can actually save the most on the backs of species over the next 20 to 100 years. And we can't ignore it. And it was a place of naivete for a large majority of AZA facilities when this effort began, because everybody was focused on endangered species through species survival plans. We even had the launching of SAFE about that time, et cetera. And SAFE, fortunately, is pretty broad. It should look to incorporate sustainability and green practices, research, sustainable animal populations. It should have all the elements and dimensions of conservation when looking at an individual species and the system that it is a part of. And that was the paradigm shift that they were looking to create, with the recognition that the way that this sets in most people to change behavior is after they're exposed to it and they experience it and they do it, then they're more likely to make change in their life and represent to our visiting public why this is so important. But if the majority of our staffs feel conservation is what animal care does, or conservation is what the conservation department does, then they're disengaged with that conservation culture entirely. And they're not making a difference to the people coming in our door. So does that help, Jeff? All right, thanks.
Thank you, Doug, for clarifying that as well. And Jim, I know your hand is up now.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on what Doug's talking about. I think when you're looking at, the AZA culture of what conservation is and the way that we defined it as field culture or field conservation for years, and getting away from that, even when we're talking about root causes, I think what the thing that you just said, Doug, is the biggest hurdle for conservation culture work, in that staff viewing conservation as someone else's job at the institution. And so even if it's root cause stuff, even if it's Seafood Watch and species recovery, like often when we have a conversation, and even at our institution, which I think, I still find frustrating. It's like, how do you get people involved in conservation? Well, let's get them out in the field with our researchers. Let's get them involved in these other things. But everybody at the institution is already playing a key role in that institution's conservation work. It's just, how do we help people see the bright lines between the, you know, the work of the ticket taker, the janitors, everybody who's there. Without any one of them, like if you want to do culture change work, you want people to learn, you want people to think about their own behavior. If they come to a facility with a dirty bathroom, they don't come out of it saying, you know, I learned a lot. It sure was a dirty, filthy place, but man, I'm ready to change my behavior. It's like, it's just a hierarchy of needs kind of thing. So like, I think the pieces of the puzzle that we're keep trying to look at here is, A, how do you draw those bright lines so that everybody understands that when I show up and do my job at the aquarium, I'm doing conservation work. And they can answer that, you know, that NASA question, like, what do you do for a living? Well, I save the ocean. Well, how do you do that? Well, I work in the front desk at the aquarium. But the other thing we want is that for people to be able to engage with the conservation work of the aquarium in the way that they would like to as well. So not just like, okay, well, you're taking tickets, great, good on you. But if they also want to be involved in another aspect, can we find ways to do that? And that's where, you know, looping back around to the original question, what are the barriers? Well, then you start to see when someone says, I would like to also be involved in this other way, how do you get them away from the work that they're doing? How does it not become volunteer work, you know, unpaid volunteer work? You know, how do you backfill those kinds of, you know, the work that they're already doing? That's where you're starting to see tangible barriers that you can create a strategy around in order to help people be involved in the way that they want to be involved. But everybody who works in our facilities is a conservationist. And I think that what I would, my selfish reason for being involved in this group is to find ideas for helping us get past this idea that there are keepers of conservation at an organization, and then there's everybody else, the support staff. That's the sort of nut that I really want to crack.
Great, thank you, Jim. I think we're all in that same boat as well, too, how to kind of break down those barriers in place. So that's really insightful. And Doug, I know you mentioned something else on here, so I didn't read it yet. Okay, going back from there. Okay, perfect. Liz, do you want to mention something?
I just was gonna feed off of those past couple comments. You know, I think, Doug, that you're absolutely right. We have to broaden our definition of conservation. And I think that becomes one of our biggest barriers too, in terms of advancing our mission and connecting our mission to the guests coming through the door, because we need the conservation work. We need, you know, all members of our community, whether they're bankers, janitors, plumbers, we all need them in this movement, and it's got to be relatable. So again, it's really expanding that definition, and it's not, you know, it's not so focused on this group of people doing this particular activity. So I think this really gets at that crux of why us, if we look at our institutions, this is microcosm of within our communities, right? Why it's so important that we figure out how we can make this a culture of conservation and relatable for every role within our organizations, because essentially that's what we're trying to do with our organizations within our communities. So, but I do think it goes back again to really broadening that definition, that we're looking at conservation from all of these different viewpoints.
Great, Liz. And I think it goes back to the initial question Jeff was saying too, you know, what are we looking to get out of this here? And I feel like a lot of us are kind of on that, you know, balancing on that same, you know, line a little bit there. So, you know, make sure that we do share these things, because we want to kind of move forward, that, you know, this pendulum a little bit forward there. So thank you for sharing that insight as well, Liz. Angie?
Hi, just to go back around to one of the challenges that we are facing is a solid distrust of the system. We have a lot of outside contractors and vendors, and you know, we're not sure if recycling is even, the staff, not necessarily like the full circle, whether recycling is even happening, and there's kind of a general distrust of any of our efforts right now. And so we are looking to communicate and fix those things. So we don't have solutions yet, but we are actively looking for those solutions. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Angie. I think we're all looking for solutions as well. So if anyone has any feedback, please share that. Oh yeah, and Chris, you said you're in a summer boat trying to repair the trust. Yeah, I think that's a probably significant piece in there. I think it comes back to what we were even talking about with Valerie, you know, the old zoos and new zoos, and trying to build a certain, you know, what does our future look like? What's that roadmap from there? So, Anyone else having a couple things to share? We have about 6 minutes left on our session here, but these are all really powerful statements we've been hearing today.
I guess I was going to say earlier, and I just want to, I really appreciate Sarah from Seattle, what you were saying about how this all has to be participatory and not top down. And it's so easy to think of it as top down. And I just really appreciated that perspective on it, that like how important it is to make sure that people stay involved at all points. To that's how we get buy-in from people.
Thank you for sharing that. Jeff, yeah.
I'll jump in and a comment on this. You've all validated, I don't know if that's good or not, that you've validated something that the approach I've been taking. So I've often said what I want to accomplish here at our zoo is that I don't care what position you've been hired for, you think of yourself as a conservationist. And I mean the 16-year-old ticket taker who's hired just for the season for 2 or 3 months. Somehow my goal is to get them to think I've come to Hogle Zoo and I've come and I am a conservationist. And you talked, there's a lot of that talk about that, about I think Doug and Jim, you mentioned this, both mentioned in different ways, this idea of it really doesn't matter what you're doing here. And I think Jim, you specifically said, you know, what's your job? It's to save animals, it's to, right, it's whatever that, however you phrase it for your particular institution, Champions for Wildlife here. But I do that by doing the tickets, I do that by cleaning the bathrooms, I do that by, you know, it's the profit. I don't know if this is even true or not, but there was, you know, supposedly in the 1960s during the NASA moon launch effort, getting to the moon, the consultant goes into the restroom and asks the janitor, what's your job here? And without hesitation, that janitor said, my job is to put a man on the moon. My specific job is to clean the restroom and keep things, but ultimately we're all here working for that one big goal. So it's like a unity of goal and a unity of identity. When I think about culture, I think a lot about identity. Do people identify as a conservationist, as your organization has identified that meaning for itself? Yeah, just a few random thoughts up there.
A big thought, Jeff. That's important. Identity is huge across, you know, it's the forefront here, and that could change the culture in itself if, you know, it's bought in and it feels like it's something you want to do. So thank you for sharing that as well. We have just a couple minutes left, you know, again, kind of like in the past, if there's nothing else to share, we could definitely have to keep on for the next 3 minutes. But I want to thank all of you for sharing a lot of very deep and powerful thoughts and ideas. And I think all our heads are spinning even more so, which is fantastic. And this is absolutely a need to continue this conversation. Like Jeff said, we'll definitely upload any resources available and share anything else you might have found. Again, we want to really build up that resource library, but thank you all for participating and sharing, and we'll be hopefully in touch very, very soon.
Thanks all. This was awesome.